You change everything. Place aux femmes pour tout changer. Pour animer la prochaine table ronde, la ministre du patrimoine canadien, the Minister of Canadian Heritage, Mélanie Joly, along with Public Services and Procurement Minister Carla Qualtrough, and Caroline Codsi and Michael Kaufman.
Bonsoir à tous. Bonsoir, bonsoir. Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure for me to be with you and moderating this important panel on Add Women, Change Everything. Et donc, je suis heureuse d'avoir l'occasion de pouvoir parler avec vous de l'importance de la question de l'égalité des sexes. Avec moi, sur ce magnifique panel, Caroline Codsi. Caroline Codsi est une professionnelle du milieu des affaires avec 25 ans d'expérience et elle est également la présidente de l'organisation La Gouvernance au féminin. Bonsoir, Caroline.
Bonsoir, Mélanie.
Michael Kaufman. Michael is the co-founder of the White Ribbon Campaign, which is the world's largest campaign to end violence against women. So thank you for being here, Michael. And obviously, my colleague, the Minister of Public Service and Procurement, the MP for Delta, a former Paralympian and a lawyer, Minister Carla Qualtrough.
Thank you.
So let's start. Obviously, we know that for our government, the gender parity is extremely important. The Prime Minister has said it in 2015 that it was fundamental to have a gender balanced cabinet. Also, if you look at Budget 2018, gender is at the core of it. So how can we assess, as a government, our own progress on what we've done? Carla, what do you think?
Well, thanks, Melanie. First of all, I can say without hesitation that having a gender-balanced cabinet has fundamentally changed the way this country is governed. And I think it has changed the way we look at public policy. Thank you. And I think it has changed the way we as individual cabinet ministers look at the way we make our decisions. And I just think the trickle-down effect, whether it be at the coordinator level within the public service, there's just a fundamental understanding that we will not make decisions unless we have consciously and deliberately taken into account the impact on women. And you cannot overstate the impact that this has had.
And Michael, what do you think? You know, looking at from at a distance.
You know, I actually think that when we look back in a number of years, I think we'll be saying that one of the most significant, perhaps the most significant thing, the legacy of this government has been putting gender equality, not just, you know, here or there, or not just, oh, that's an important thing too, but central to every conversation, every policy, every initiative. And I think that's going to stand the test of time. I'm really excited. And I have to say, when I travel around the world, over and over, this is what people are saying to me.
Et Caroline, qu'en penses-tu?
Alors oui, je suis tout à fait d'accord avec ces commentaires. Je dirais que depuis plus de 10 ans que je travaille dans la sphère de l'égalité des genres, la sortie de Justin Trudeau en 2015, Because it's 2015, a fait le tour du monde. On en a parlé partout. Ça a été marquant non seulement dans le monde politique, mais aussi dans le monde des affaires, parce qu'il y a de plus en plus de conscience de la... Non pas seulement pourquoi est-ce qu'on fait ça, not only the why do we need more women, but now we're talking about how do we get more women. So the why, I think, has been taken care of, and we're moving on to finding these women now.
Well, that's an interesting segue, Caroline, because, you know, when you think about it, what's our destination? What does success really look like? What are we aiming at? As a government, within society, within the corporate world? What do you think?
Well, I think that with 27% women MPs, we still have a long way to go. That needs to change. But I think even more crucial in my world, in the corporate world, is that in terms of corporate boards, at this point, 45% of boards in Canada still don't have one woman. So as we're talking about the importance of having more women, 30%, 40% of women. We need to keep in mind that 45% of publicly traded companies don't even have one. So they are not only leaving half the population aside, they are not benefiting from all the advantages of having diversity around the table. So of course, my first topic is women, but we could also bring that further and talk about diversity in general, to be able to have more innovation, better ideas, more robust decision-making. I mean, if I have a board where everybody looks like me and thinks like me and has the same perspective, I think it's evident that we're not going to progress. So I need to have men on my board because they've got a different perspective. I need to have older people, younger people, etc. So I think this is something that is crucial for us to be more competitive, more innovative, and to simply, be just and fair to half of the population.
And, well, talking about diversity, Carla, I know you have a specific point of view on this.
I sure do. I mean, I firmly believe, as we all do, that the broader the range of perspectives brought to any decision-making table, the better the decisions will be. The more durable they'll be, the more reflective of the people we're trying to serve they'll be. And from my perspective, that includes the perspective of someone with a disability. And I think we cannot, I mean, you can't meet a more innovative person than someone who's always had to navigate a world that wasn't built for them. And I think we have to have that perspective at every decision-making table.
Yes, Michael.
You know, when I think about what success will look like, it's going to be a world where my 1.5-year-old granddaughter will never, ever have to think about the possibility that she could experience sexual, physical, emotional abuse of any sort. It'll be a world where she won't even conceive of the possibility of being paid less. That it would be a world in which the opportunities that will be there for her won't be prescribed either by her sex or by trying to sort of fit into a certain mold that my half of the population has established over the past 8,000 or 10,000 years. But it's also going to be a world where my 4-year-old grandson will be doing equally, the work in the home and be not just sort of a supporter of women's rights, but won't even think about it, because it will be so much part of his reality, a reality of not only equality, but a transformation of our very ideas of what we think about what it means to be a man. That, for me, will be when we've made it.
That's worth it. Yeah. So talking about finding allies, really have a allyship. You've been working on this a lot, Michael. We certainly are having a lot of conversations in this country about how can men and boys support more gender equality and women's rights. How can we have that more within our society? And also, are we creating new ideals for boys right now?
When I first started doing work on these themes almost 40 years ago, which either means I'm getting old or I started in kindergarten, but it was just seen as a very weird question to even ask. Why bother with men? And now what we're seeing in Canada and around the world is a huge conversation about men, both as allies with women, pushing for gender equality, but also fighting for changes in men's lives. And I'll just tell you two stories about that. One is I was giving a talk to the National Rugby League managers, players, owners. This was in the Rugby Hall of Fame in Sydney, Australia. And I was talking about ending violence against women. And I posed a question to this audience, and I said, why should your rugby league speak out about ending violence against women, speak out for equal rights? And in my notes, I had that someone was going to stand up and give the business case. It's good for the bottom line. We want to attract more women, fans. It's bad when one of our players gets arrested. That's what I was assuming they would say. So I posed the question, and this guy stands up. Now, I don't know if you've ever stood next to a rugby player, a professional rugby player.
Well, Carla has, because she's the former Minister of Sport.
He wasn't taller than me, but his neck was the size of my shoulders. He was a big man, but he just sort of had this very gentle demeanor. I posed the question, why should you speak out? And he just looked at me like I was crazy, and he just said, because it's the right thing to do. And what we're seeing now across Canada and around the world is more and more men who are embracing gender equality, embracing speaking out against violence against women, because they know it's the right thing to do. But the second thing that's happening is this. Not only are more men supporting women's rights because it's the right thing to do, because it's going to be good for the economy, because it's going to be good for our families, and on, but because we're discovering it's good for men. One of the strange paradoxes of a male-dominated society is, yes, we've defined this world of enormous privilege and power for my half of the species. But at the same time, we've set up demands on men that are impossible for any of us to live up to. You know, you've always got to be strong, you have to be powerful, you have to be in control, you have to have endless sex, you have to do this, you have to have that, you have to have a Calvin Klein body. Now, it's true, some of us do. I do have a Calvin Klein. But let's face it, not everyone can.
Humility as well, yes.
No, but the thing is, we can't live up to these expectations. And so what feminism does for men is actually hold out this incredible promise, not only of better workplaces, better lives, better relationships, but holds out this promise to men of being happier, being healthier, being safer.
Well, I think it talks about ultimately the importance of authenticity. Yeah. If one can actually be himself or herself, obviously I think that makes up a happier and you know, much more serene society. And I think also that it talks ultimately about the importance of moral leadership. And that's something that the world is really needs right now, the importance of moral leadership in the context of nationalism and the context of populism. How can people be themselves and actually be playing their moral, the higher ground, while actually being completely authentic? I think that's fundamental. That's one of the biggest strengths of our Prime Minister. But also, I think it's one of the biggest strengths of any politicians right now that are actually very comfortable with their emotions and are able to talk about them. But Caroline and Carla, both of you, toutes les deux, vous êtes des mamans. Et toutes les deux, vous êtes des mamans de garçons. Comment vous réagissez par rapport au nouveau modèle qu'on donne à nos garçons?
Bah, écoute, Mélanie, moi, je te dirais que je suis fière d'avoir un fils féministe qui, depuis, évidemment, sa jeune enfance, est très impliqué à la gouvernance au féminin, qui suit tous ces discours de près et qui a intégré cette notion dont Michael parle, que je pense essentielle, que ce n'est pas nécessaire d'être coincé dans ces stéréotypes de genre où le garçon se doit d'être un super-héros et la fille se doit d'être une princesse qui attend le prince charmant. Alors, c'est quelque chose qui doit se travailler dès la plus jeune enfance. Et ça, c'est un peu compliqué parce que souvent, on se retrouve dans des environnements, par exemple, corporatifs, où on se demande pourquoi tel PDG ou tel président de conseil a des comportements comme ceci ou comme cela. Puis, il n'a qu'à revenir en arrière et se demander comment il a été élevé. Donc, ça commence chez nous. Ça commence à la maison, ça commence à l'école. Déjà, dans les cours d'école, on a trop tendance aussi à s'attendre à ce que les garçons jouent au ballon et les filles jouent à la poupée. Donc, il faut vraiment faire une réflexion sur comment déconstruire ce que la société a construit sur des décennies et des siècles. Et j'ai été vraiment très impressionnée par Upper Canada College à Toronto. They invited me to speak on the changing face of feminism. A couple of months ago, I spoke to 15 to 18-year-old boys. I had never done that. I usually speak to crowds that are very senior and either in the corporate world or political. And I've never prepped as much as for that presentation because I thought I'm going to be speaking to 15 to 18-year-old boys. How do I bring that conversation to their level? And I think it went phenomenally well because there was a big lineup of questions. And one of those young boys said to me, "This was the best talk today." And I was in competition with artificial intelligence and space exploration. So I thought, today's boys get it. They understand the importance and their role. And I think that's key, that they understand what their role is in all this and how they can change it so that when they get to become CEOs, they're not going to put up with an executive committee that's all composed of men. They will not have it.
And I guess I would add that we have 2 boys and 2 girls, and my oldest boy is 21 and my youngest son is 5. My 21-year-old's in the military, and he's at Royal Military College, and my 5-year-old is in kindergarten, and we have 2 girls in between. And I would say that my 21-year-old speaks the language of inclusion. He grew up in a family where we don't focus on difference, we focus on similarities, and we celebrate difference. And I just hear the way him and his friends talk, even within a very structured military environment. And I want to send a shout out to our Minister of Defense, because he is creating a significant cultural shift within the military. And my son, going into a career in the military, will be a beneficiary of that. And my daughter, who's thinking of also joining the military, my 18-year-old daughter, will also be the beneficiary of that. So, and that's this government. That is our Prime Minister, and that is the Minister of Defense. And that leadership cannot go will have such a massive impact. Now, for my 5-year-old, who's growing up in a world where his mom is a cabinet minister, his mom has a disability, he's got a very diverse world around him, he too speaks the language of inclusion from the wide-eyed perspective of a child who thinks everybody is equal and who is going out into the world with amazing role models and amazing just perspectives on what he can and cannot do. And for my 7-year-old daughter and her friends, that means you can be and do anything. And that's exactly where, now we've got a lot of work to do. Don't get me wrong, I don't mean to be too Pollyanna about this, but I have such hope for my children, and I have hope for the next generation that at one point we'll get to the point where your 1.5-year-old granddaughter just wakes up and decides, today I want to change the world, and she's going to be able to do it.
If we would do a survey in this room, I'm convinced that when asked the question, what was one of the most important events and movements that happened in 2017, many of you would say the Me Too movement and Time's Up. And so I would like to know, what do you think? How has that changed conversations? What is your analysis pretty much 6 months after the first allegations and movement that started out of Hollywood and that became a worldwide movement? Michael, what about you?
My first reaction is it's, about time, isn't it? Just to see, the thing as a man that has long inspired me, and is the reason I'm sitting here, I think the reason why so many men have been speaking out over the years, is because of the strength, the power, the courage, the fortitude of women and the women's movement. And it seems to be in some ways crescendoing around Me Too. And so the power of that, and I know a lot of men say this is scary for me now, I don't know what I'm supposed to say or do. And so, but what that does is it opens up space for a conversation. So, I think that what it does, and what it does, I think, for men, is say, guys, start listening.
It's interesting to see how that has positively impacted the corporate world as well, because of course it all started in Hollywood, but now in the corporate world where there has been a lot of bosses that would use their power over younger women to get them promotions or whatnot. Now there's no tolerance for that. And I read a research that demonstrated that the gender wage gap was also impacted by the Me Too movement, because a lot of women who sensed that they were in an environment where there was a lot of harassment decided to leave, and often did not have a job waiting for them. So they would accept a lower salary where they would go. So that was not helping either their career path or their salary. So I think this is impacting every sphere of our society. The only word of caution I want to put here is we have a mentoring program at Women in Governance, and we have a lot of men mentoring women, and it's essential because there's not as many role models, female role models, as males. So if we want our mentors to be all CEOs or chairs of boards, we have to have a certain number of men, and some have said, well, I'm uncomfortable now with all of this in terms of the perception of being with a younger woman and mentoring her. So I think it's very important to also be very respectful towards men and give them a safe space and not, you know, it's not a them against us thing. And men need to continue supporting women the way that they do. I can talk about my own career that has been tremendously helped by men. Actually, more men have helped me than women have. So we're very fortunate for the Me Too, but we just need to be cautious that it doesn't go too far.
But do you think that being the minister in charge of arts and culture, obviously, I've been very, very, very proud of seeing artists at the forefront of social change again, because this started because of artists, you know, saying time's up. And what I'm seeing is really the audiovisual sector, so film and television, and to a certain extent also the music sector is really working on finding new ways to deal with this issue, having codes of conduct, for example, training. But now the issue is much more how we deal with complaints. How do we make sure there's due process? And also, as a government, is how can we have more narratives that are coming from different parts of society, especially women? So how can there be more women screenwriters, more women producers? Now, Caroline, do you really think, because I'm seeing movement in the sector, but do you really think that the corporate sector has moved as much as the artistic sector, which obviously had to deal with this because there was a flood of complaints?
Well, to be honest, over the past decade, since I've started working in this field, I haven't seen a tremendous change in terms of the executive level. So now younger women are able to progress better than they used to. But if we look at boards, I mentioned 45% of boards that have 0 women, but if we look at overall, only 14% of women sit on corporate boards, only 5% of CEOs are women. And if we look at, for instance, what happens in other countries, if we compare to Europe, where they have quotas laws, we don't have quotas laws in Canada, which means that the impact in France, for instance, they have 40%. The law required 40% of women in 2017 and 20% in 2015, and they've made it. So France, being considered a pretty macho country, has succeeded in finding these women. In Quebec, we have a law, la loi de gouvernance des sociétés d'État, for our crown corporations since Jean Charest. And quite frankly, they do have parity. They have 50% of women at Hydro-Quebec and the Liquor Board, SAQ, etc. So I think it's quite clear that when you legislate, you find the women, and when you don't legislate, you often find the excuses. So I truly believe that although there's a lot of men and women, by the way, who are against quotas for various reasons, we need to accept that this is the only way that we're going to have movement quickly, and then it will become part of, it will be a second nature that we need to have women on boards. But as long as we just let it be and think that it's going to come naturally, we're not going to see it in our lifetime. And I want to add, and I wish Justin Trudeau was here, because I had asked him to write a letter to every chairman of the board that has 0 women, which is something that was done by David Cameron in the UK a few years ago and was very successful. Because when you're a chair of a board and you get a letter from your head of state that says we're paying attention, well, you might start thinking and do something about it.
Thanks. Carla, I would like to hear you on 2 things. Actually, the question, yes, of gender parity for crown corporations and boards in general, but also going back to the, having safe workplaces, because I think these are 2 issues. It's, yes, having more women in position of leadership, but also making sure that there's actually no sexual harassment in any form of workplaces in the country.
And that's a real tough nut to crack. I mean, for me, what I've observed through the Me Too movement is both a mainstreaming of a conversation that's been happening through whisper networks for years, and an empowerment of marginalized individuals who haven't felt like they've had a voice. And when you add the intersectionality of race or disability, people really feel marginalized. And so I hear you on the quota thing, but I would add that we have to couple that with a realization that the barriers that exist don't just exist in recruitment practices. They exist in access to education and access to childcare. And so if we want to really give women a chance to get at all these wonderful opportunities, we have to start removing barriers the day they're born. And we have to keep removing them until we get to a point of parity. I would say on the sexual harassment thing, it's been a lot of good work has been done in creating systems and processes, but enough work hasn't been done on the informal culture change that needs to happen to really succeed, to really make a difference. And, you know, politics is ripe. I was a staffer in the late 1990s, and being a young woman in my 20s at that time, I can tell you the power imbalance was intimidating, and it was there, and we all just accepted it because we wanted to work on the Hill. And that no longer can be the case. I never want another woman, you know, to look at an opportunity and wonder, who can I surround myself with to make this work? I want to be the person they surround themselves with to make it work for them.
Yes, totally agree. And tantôt, j'étais présente pour une conversation intéressante où il y avait un panel. Alexandra Mendez était sur le panel. Il y avait Eddie Fry aussi, Anita Vanderbilt et Christine Poirier. Et il y a une personne de la salle qui a posé une question très intéressante. Comment on gère les micro-agressions? Et donc, j'aimerais vous poser cette question. I was earlier on the panel, and I was earlier listening to a panel, and one of the person in the room asked, how do we deal with microaggressions? And obviously, Carla, being a politician, being myself a politician, we deal with that on social media every day. Maybe some of our staff is dealing with it while we speak. So I would like to have your point of view. And also, Michael, your perspective as the founder of the White Ribbon Organization, as a man as well.
It's really hard to live in the bubble that we live in. Both the public aspect of our jobs being such that everything happens immediately now through social media, and everybody's watching how you respond. You don't have the luxury, perhaps as one used to sit back and contemplate, how am I going to react to this? What am I going to do? Because people are watching us all the time. And with social media, it's very, very difficult to be thoughtful almost, or considered in the way you respond to something. For me, these are deal breakers. I have a very personal, I love my job. I love being a member of parliament. I love being a cabinet minister. I think we all owe these positions the respect that the office that we hold deserves. And I think it is completely unacceptable, and I will call out at any chance I get any kind of behavior that undermines the importance of the work that we're doing. Not because it's me, but because it's you, and because it might be your granddaughter, and it might be my daughter. And we just have to have zero tolerance for this kind of behavior. And it's awkward, and it's bullying, and it's intimidating, but think about the position of power and influence that we have. And if we're not calling it out, how can we expect anybody to call it out? It is incumbent upon us to do it.
I totally agree. Calling it out is fundamental, and actually also realizing that we have the power of calling it out and influencing others to do that is fundamental. And I think when you become a politician, you don't realize how much the power you have until actually you go ahead and you act upon it. So I totally agree with you. What do you think?
You know, if I could just enlarge the question a little bit, because I think that part of the answer to a whole range of questions is the importance of mobilizing that part of the population that for too long has said, well, gender issues aren't my issues. Those are, quote, only women's issues. By the way, don't you like that, only women's issues? I mean, last time I checked, that was 51% of the population. But you know, when we started White Ribbon, almost 28 years ago, whatever it is now. 3 of us in Toronto, quickly joined by others. I see Ken Fisher there, across the country. And the reason we started was because of the impact of the women's movement, who were challenging men to do something. And when we started it, it wasn't with delusions of grandeur. We just said, we've got to find ways, because we knew that the majority of men weren't committing acts of violence against women. But we knew that the vast majority of us have been silent. And because of that silence, we'd allowed the violence to continue. Well, fast forward, and this strange little, it's not even an organization, it's a campaign, it's an idea, has probably traveled to about 90 countries. In some countries, it's way bigger than anything that ever happened in Canada. I mean, right now in Australia, for example, it's sort of, they have a National White Ribbon Day that everyone takes part in. They have programs that the whole Australian armed forces have gone through. The corporations are going through a workplace accreditation program to develop policies not only around sexual harassment, but supporting women who are experiencing domestic violence. And one of the things, and I think as Canadians, we can be incredibly proud, because it has Canada written all over it, in the sense that our idea from the start was to develop it as a decentralized campaign, because we didn't think that we had all the answers, but we knew that we had to find ways to give voice, to inspire people. And so around the world, the way this campaign has gotten taken up, it's even bizarre at times. I've seen pictures from Pakistan of a white ribbon wrestling tournament with men from a village turning out. And how do you get men from this village? Well, apparently you have a wrestling tournament. We know that within First Nations communities in Canada, many of them have in recent years have said, oh, ribbon, schmibbon. So they've developed this wonderful moose hide campaign, taking a piece of moose hide and just the same meaning as the white ribbon. So seeing this idea of not being sort of beholden to a certain form of organizing, but saying that, first of all, as Canadians, but then as citizens of the world, we've got to find ways to encourage and for women to keep insisting at us to end our silence, but also to think about our own attitudes and our behaviors, but also to develop the policies that are going to so it's not just my individual volition. So for example, the announcement in Canada recently that we're going to develop so-called daddy days, non-transferable parental days that are aimed at fathers or a second parent. I can tell you that is the international game changer. Where this has taken place in the Nordic countries, that has been the single most important thing that have not only changed the participation of fathers, not just immediately, but for years afterwards, but has been the single most important thing to push for women's participation at work, for pay equality, because you've shifted all the power relations in society. You've redefined what's important. I am incredibly proud to be in a country that's bringing that in.
Caroline, rapidement, comme ça on va pouvoir poser une dernière question à la fin.
Well, what I want to say about microaggressions is we've spoken about the impact on women. I want to talk about the impact on people who don't look like everybody else, immigrants. I'm from Lebanon. I was born in Beirut. I grew up through the Lebanese war, and before moving to this wonderful country when I was 22 years old, I moved to Paris first, and it was an amazing experience, although I was there with no parents and no money, but I worked it out. And what I thought was very difficult is how the other people were kind of putting me in a box. You come from a war-torn country, they're keeping you in that box. Who are your parents? Who are you? What do you do or what can you do for this country? But when I arrived here in Canada, it is so different in terms of how welcoming the country is and how everybody is really on the same level. It really doesn't matter whether you're coming from a war-torn country or whether you were born here. You actually have the same chances to moving. And when you feel that coming from the others, it empowers you, which is something that I'm not certain immigrants to other countries, like in Europe, can feel. And I'm not sure that they can contribute the same way that they would want to be because of the fact that they would be put into that box. So I'm really proud to be in Canada, and I think that that's probably one of the main reasons why I put so much of my heart into bringing equality to this country, all the way to the decision-making bodies, because we deserve it.
Well, Je pense que la question de l'égalité des genres est fondamentale à notre gouvernement. D'ailleurs, le premier ministre Trudeau a été applaudi chaleureusement à l'Assemblée nationale française lorsqu'il a parlé de l'importance de l'égalité des sexes. Et je pense que ça va être nécessairement une priorité pour notre gouvernement au cours des prochaines années et, on l'espère, des prochains mandats. So we have 19 seconds left. I just wanted to say how much I was proud to be on a panel with you. This conversation is extremely important, but I think more than talking about it, we must act upon it. And I think we have a commitment, all of us, to make sure that that is happening. Merci à tous. Have a great day. Merci.
Thank you.
Thank you.